When we talk about the future, it's not only about transformative living experience, but it's also about what is required of us as people to make the future a reality. How do we prepare for that future? Up next, we have a fireside chat with Dr. Ing Ilham A. Habibi, the Chief Executive of the National ICT Council, Republic of Indonesia, moderated by Mr. Sachin B. Gopalan, the founder and president director at Orbit Future Academy. Let's imagine a future within reach.
Hello, Indonesia is the fourth largest populated nation in the world. Indonesia is also part of G20, expected to go from a ranking of 16 to a ranking of 4 by 2050. Indonesia is a young nation. 60% of its population is below 29 years. It represents a growth economy that will largely be influenced by Industry 4.0, and it needs to scale up its workforce. Therefore, Indonesia has an opportunity to play a significant role in global economy and perhaps carve a niche for itself. So artificial intelligence is one such technology that has the power to be relevant to everyone, not just also people interested in other fields. Here we have today Dr. Ilham Akbar Habibi, the Chief Executive of the National ICT Council, Republic of Indonesia, and I'd like to welcome him. Hi, Ilham.
Hi, Sachin. How are you today?
Doing great. We wanted to have a chat with you, particularly because you're at the helm of many initiatives at a national level, both from policy as well as, I believe, you're also in the education space for artificial intelligence. So some very interesting discussion topics that we have today. So Ilham, I'll get started right away. Could you give us a view into what is the role played by the National ICT Council, and how does the ICT Council see skilling and upskilling, especially in the area of AI?
Okay. Well, first of all, the so-called National ICT Council is a government institution, which is probably more of a role of advisory council. Meaning to say, we give information, we coordinate information, and give them ideas to line ministries in Indonesia, and line ministries can be also other government institutions, not only on the central level but also in the provincial level. So we are basically communicating between parties, everything to do with government. It could be the central government institutions or local government, not only provincial, but in fact also the cities or the independent cities or the so-called regencies, including also state-owned companies, state-owned universities, everything that has to do with state. But our role, again, is advisory. So we are not supposed to do any decision-making. We can suggest initiatives, we can convey information, we can orchestrate meetings, but the decisions have to be made formally by the ministries themselves, because they have the legitimacy to do that. That is not with us. We are an advisory council, but it's quite useful to be in that position. I mean, there is sometimes a lot of overlap between ministries and even rivalries, and so it's good to have that function available, where there is a third party that can speak up and still be seen as a part of the overall government, although we are not a ministry itself.
You're very right. Actually, it's a very key role to be playing a coordinator role across so many different initiatives. So how has the ICT Council looked at AI as a technology, or what are the impacts that it sees coming forward?
First of all, let me give you the status of AI in general in Indonesia. Just last year, the then so-called Agency for the Application and Assessment of Technology, BPPT, which actually has now been integrated into a new body called the Body for Research and Innovation, the National Body for Research and Innovation, or BRIN, has established a draft of a national strategy regarding AI. But that's a draft. by a research, or I should say technology agency, in order to be officially applicable, it needs to be something, either a presidential decree or ministerial decree, which is relevant for AI, say in research and technology, or in education and culture, or others, or industry, which has not been the case yet. But there is something like a draft, an official document regarding AI strategy in Indonesia by this agency for the assessment and application of technology. So there is still some work to be done in order to make that a reality regarding policies that are really applicable and also relevant for Indonesia's future, that has to do with AI, which is basically a lot. Yeah. So there's still a lot of homework to be done. However, there is already a lot of initiatives available, such as within the Ministry of Education and Culture, which has not been broadened, adding the research and technology portfolio to it. There is something called the Campus Merdeka, or the how can I say, the emancipated learning. Yeah, it's emancipated learning, and within that program for emancipated learning, AI plays a major role, meaning to say that students that say they are enrolled at University A, they don't find a course related to AI at the university, they can take it at any other institution that is acknowledged. It can be a university or a private company, but the main point is that course is acknowledged as such. They can take that course there and get credit at their university. So it's basically the campus, the borders of the campus have been widened, that including institutions that can offer relevant courses that have to be acknowledged by that campus in order for that very student to get his or her degree. And AI, as it stands, is an integral part of that program, which shows that the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology is actually firmly focused on that very important subject. But again, it's a first step, right? What I'd like to see as a chief executive of the National ICT Congress is much more, detailed and focused policies in the sectors that are relevant for AI. These could be education, it could be industry, it could be anything to do with research and innovation, and others. I think that the list is almost endless, because everything can be impacted by AI. But we are just at the beginning right now. We're still exploring, and I think until that happens, we need to work much more on basically making that happen.
Sure. So you made an interesting point that the first steps have been taken, and the education ministry is probably, getting into it right away. How has it been? What's the reception like in the industry, companies and the private sector or the government sector, who are looking at hiring this kind of talent?
Well, I think it's clear that Indonesia is very focused in achieving its goal to be a developed country in, say, 2045, which is still 24 years to go. But when it comes to planning regarding having the right amount and quality of the necessary human resources, 24 years is actually not much. You have to imagine that people have to get the education, and then they have to get their hands on a little bit, and then get some experience. And at some point in time, they are probably regarded as senior, people with a superior quality in a particular field. It just doesn't happen overnight. So policies that are being decided and applied today are relevant for the coming decades. So I think the digital factor has been pushed a lot in the last, say, 1 to 2 years, particularly because of the events of the pandemic. So what digital can do to us in a difficult situation such as the pandemic, it has been demonstrated quite clearly. Not all of it is good news, because we have learned also that the digital factor can cause a lot of amplifications to divides that have been there before. Just imagine that people have to go online schooling, all of them, because of the pandemic, but some, they live in a very cramped household with lots of people sharing one room and maybe only one device with a bad internet connection. How much they will be left behind, those people that have a totally different access to the internet or to the digital technology, right? So how to basically make sure that this is as how can I say, as equally as available and accessible to everybody is a major challenge. But at the same time, it requires a major upgrade when it comes to literacy issues pertaining to that digital factor. Right? It's the right understanding of how to use the technology, the basically the behavior pattern. I mean, you can basically go a completely different way when you rely too much on the internet or information provided by the internet without being in a position to think critically about it. Right? I mean, learning one thing is one thing, but also making sure that what you learn is the right thing to learn is to be learned is another. So I have talked only about the education right now. Right? So yes, I think the awareness level of Indonesians and the Indonesian government is very high right now, that yes, we need to do a lot regarding the digital factor, but what is it really? I mean, yes, one would be AI, another would be cloud computing or digital data analysis or blockchain, or there's so many things that need to be understood, but definitely, as you said very correctly, Sachin, AI is one of the major categories that we need to vastly improve in Indonesia regarding the quality of the Indonesians or human resources in general that are capable in that very important topic.
So, Ilham, you made a very good point there. I wanted to actually highlight the fact that Indonesia is now considered to be in the top 5 startup ecosystems in the world. And a lot of startups are very tech intensive, obviously, right? Because there are, even though they may not be a pure tech play, but they are users of technology. How do you see that playing out, where the usage of AI interconnecting with startups going forward in the next, let's say, 5-10 years?
Okay, I think one factor that we need to be aware about is that a major part of the startup is related not purely to their original business model, but what comes with it, which is basically the data collection along processing their own business model. That these kind of data is always of value, particularly if you have the means to analyze it. And when it comes to data in vast amounts, there's no other way rather than to use AI. AI is various categories, and that regard is probably more about machine learning. There's some visual, computer vision data, etc. So there's various categories of AI applicable to the data collected by those various startups, which in some cases not necessarily directly linked to their business model, but they're just gathered along the way, but become a part of the value of that very startup. So the user of that data might be the startup itself, but it might be sometimes other companies that would make use of that data and collaborate with that startup, or just simply buy the data of the startup. So there's always the question of confidentiality of data, but in many cases, due to my observation, even if the company asks the user that basically they get the data from, whether the data user would be okay with that, many would just say yes, they don't have a problem, as long as they know that or they at least have the feeling that the service of that very startup is going to be improved because they provide the data. Many people are maybe not so clear about the fact that that data can be misused. So there's a lot of people that really don't understand the process and the thinking behind collecting that data, that they later on can become a victim of that. And a negative, if you have a negative interpretation of the data collecting and analysis, that is not in many people's mind. Yeah, they don't think about that. Yeah. But it's possible, of course.
So Ilham, coming back to this topic about education being the leading activity right now, leading us into the AI world. So we want to understand a little bit about the challenges in Indonesia, because as you know, there are 34 provinces and Indonesia is spread across 3 time zones. How do you see that kind of a challenge being addressed? Do you think AI is for everyone really? Should it be going across all 34 provinces? What should be the approach, or should it be focused only on a few major cities? How do you see that playing out?
First of all, you mentioned the word city. Well, the dichotomy to a city would be the rural countryside, right? Question is AI really only applicable for the city? Well, I don't think so, right? I think AI, wherever you have the situation where you need you have a complex problem, and you need data, maybe a huge amount of data in order to solve that problem. It can be for anything, in the city or in the countryside or even in space. Wherever you are, you will have this kind of situation where you have a vast amount of data and you really don't know what to do with the data. And for that, you need something that studies the data and gives you recommendations to your questions. Yeah. So basically, AI, on the other hand, is of course also dependent on what questions are basically asked. Yeah. So there has been a very, I think, clever quote by somebody from Google that basically said that AI can be opinions, basically coded opinions. You have an opinion about something, you code, and then you have a result. But I mean, there's always a bias regarding the AI. So we have to make sure that the standard of AI is basically balanced. So the people that design the AI should be coming from, they should be quite diverse from the background. So we don't make sure that the questions that are asked through the AI are basically a balance itself, and we don't have a biased outcome regarding the AI. So AI is it's not an easy tool to be used, but I think there's a lot of benefit once it's applied in the right way. Yeah. So but it's really not limited to, it can be even applied to religious questions or anything that has data in big amounts, and you want to understand something, a pattern or some relationship. AI is of great use to everything, basically. Right? It's a very universal tool, but it depends how you use it, basically.
For Indonesia specifically, do you see any specific sectors where there would be a higher application of AI going forward? Because Indonesia's economy is so different from so many other countries, right?
Okay, I think one that comes immediately into my mind is basically the question of what we are facing right now. Is we have on one hand the desire to grow as a country to what you mentioned before. We want to be a high developed country, and for that we need to go through a process of industrialization. The industrialization occasionally has some negative side impact if you do it in the wrong way, right? Say you basically have a one-sided agriculture policy. We are now the world champion in doing palm oil, for instance. Yeah, I think the most square kilometers or square hectares in the world for palm oil is in Indonesia. I'm not saying it's bad or good, but what we can do is we can basically make sure that that kind of policy is not having negative side effects, say, on biodiversity. It's a very complicated question to be answered because there's so many data points, right? And so that would be one thing that would immediately come into my mind. Regarding analyzing, understanding the situation that Indonesia is in right now, and for sure, being the chair for the G20 next year, and for sure having seen the results of COP26 in Glasgow just now, is all eyes on countries like Indonesia that are big, that have vast amounts of nature that needs to be protected in a certain way in order to ascertain that the CO2 emissions will be minimized and the so-called sequestration will be maximized. So the emission minimized, the sequestration maximized, and Indonesia plays a major role there. And I think AI is in a very good position to really understand how the overall picture could look like, looking at the complexity of Indonesia regarding its nature. Right? And that's only one aspect. Yeah, there's others like say, what about other sectors of the industry where Indonesia is probably has a lot of challenges. What to do with understanding, for instance, every year we have the question of the minimum pay, the so-called minimum pay in every province. How much should it be in order to basically give the workers the right amount of money for income, at the same time not weaken the economy too much? It's always a tussle between the employer and the employees. One, of course, wants to minimize the increase in order to remain competitive. The other one wants to maximize the increase in order to have a better quality of life. So what to do? Yeah, these are the questions I think that are coming to my mind immediately, where AI could be of great help But again, provided that the questions asked to AI comes from from a council of experts, where you make sure that it's quite equally distributed and reflects the whole spectrum of questions to be asked. Yeah, and because that goes into the design of the AI, and that's being coded, and if you do it wrongly, then the result is biased. So basically, that is also the danger of AI. We should not believe too much in the black box, but you need to make sure that the black box is equally designed and reflecting the whole spectrum of society, and reflecting all the questions that should be asked to AI or through AI. Yeah.
So, Ilham, you've always championed the grassroots level. You always found a deep interest in finding ways to connect to the grassroots. Do you see what impact do you see of AI playing a role in connecting the grassroots in terms of maybe participating in the AI revolution, having people from remote areas skilled up in AI, or application of AI within their own areas?
Do you mean that those people should be converted to AI experts, or people that work with AI, or should be feeding AI with their input?
What's your view? How do you see the interplay between grassroots and advanced technologies?
Okay, first of all, there's always if you talk grassroots, then one thing comes immediately into my mind, which is inclusion, right? And say something which I'm quite familiar with is financial inclusion. So financial inclusion is possible through what we today call financial technology. I'm not saying that everybody is included, but more people are included. But how do they do it? Well, traditional banking needs a certain category of customers that cannot be, is not so much represented by many people in the grassroots level. They don't have a steady income. They don't have assets they can use as a collateral. They don't work in a formal manner, have a contract with the company, have securities like pension, insurance, etc. None of that. However, I mean, if we study the data that they have, it is possible because they have something like they have a life situation whereby you can basically analyze it to the degree that if they need money, you could lend them that much money with with a certain percentage of certainty, you can get the money back, basically, right? So, but it does not use the traditional banking regulations, rule and regulation that's very rigid for good reason. But if you want to do more than that, then you have to use fintech, and fintech is using exactly that. They have a lot of data points. They have a model which is by and large AI driven, and the more people basically feed that model, the better the model becomes, and therefore the more people are being helped. Again, I'm not saying that everybody can be helped, but for sure more than through the traditional banking system, right? So that is a good example of how to include people more, including people from the grassroots through technology, right? That's for the financial technology. There's others, I believe, like for education or for health. But let me just maybe detail the example of fintech a little bit more, because I'm actually quite familiar with that. Yeah.
Sure. So
okay.
Yeah. So Ilham, the point here, you made some good points about how agri-tech, fintech, these are the sectors that could be having a huge impact on Indonesia. How about retail? Do you see any major areas of opportunity for retail? E-commerce, retail, etc.
Okay. Retail. Okay, may I focus on a particular part of retail? Let's say fashion. Can I talk about fashion? Yeah. Sure. The advent of digital technology has basically exacerbated the dominance of what we call fast fashion. And now with the even ever increasing speed, we have now even fashion cycles that have been even faster than what we know as fast fashion. So very fast fashion or hyper fast fashion or hyper fashion. I don't know how to call this anymore. So it's basically minimizing the design cycles from being months to maybe only weeks, and maybe in the future only days, from the time it was designed and it's in the store, right? On a global basis. what is the meaning of that? Well, I think it's a model that's not sustainable, because it means it has led to a enormous overproduction of textiles, that people that have a taste for fast fashion, they they basically use the fashion only for a very short time, and then they throw it away, and you have a lot of waste, basically, right? So I think that the new generation of new generation like Gen Z or millennials, they don't think like this. They think more in a sustainable way. So basically, you're talking about the business models that have been made possible through the advent of digital technology. In this regard, AI is certainly part of that. You have a lot of suppliers around the world, and you have basically design centers. Some are distributed, some are centralized, but managing all of that in a way that can bring the product to the consumer ASAP, and the sooner the better, but it actually also shortens the lifetime. So how will we change in the future? I think that the new generations will be thinking more in a sustainable way. They do this already. So there will be always the question, how can we source locally? Basically, sort of like a circular economy kind of thing. It basically, you have to think in a different way with different data, but basically using AI or other technologies. So the outcome of that would be a retail system regarding the fashion industry that is more sustainable, creates less waste, maybe also less logistics. You would maybe include more companies from within your own country, or even region or community, if possible. So it would even out maybe the large discrepancy, the dominance of only a few companies around the world that dominate the fast fashion industry, to much more. I mean, I remember the times many years back when fashion was much more local, right? But these days, a trend that has been spotted in a country which is far away, maybe on a different continent, becomes like very trendy in my own country, right? And because everybody knows about this, but we also know about the negative side effects of that. And I think again, technology can be used in order to maximize the outcome in a way that is much more sustainable, that you have more local involvement, have a better circular economy. So there's basically new parameters, new data you try to understand, and for that you need a sophisticated system like that.
Sure. So this brings about. Yeah, go ahead. You wanted to say something?
No, but this is only, you talked about retail, right? Now retail, and I gave you an answer regarding fashion. So I think you can apply the same thinking process also about food and beverage, right? Or about any household product you want to do. I mean, does it have to be in the same system that we apply right now, in having all the negative side effects to the economy and ecology, or can we do it in a more responsible way? Giving you an extreme example, how the future could look like. I mean, if we think about a movement that had started in the US called the Fab Lab, that is a movement created in MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The Fab Lab mojo is basically you produce as much as you can yourself. You can do it yourself. Now you expand that mojo to independent cities, then basically there's a charter that has been signed by a lot of cities that have committed themselves by the year of 2044 to produce as much as they can by themselves. And I mean as much as they can, including the food, the energy, the cars, the motorcycles, everything within the city. So that is only possible if you adhere to digital technology. You share basically designs around the world, but you produce locally. So the mojo of this Fab City convention says the atoms stay at home, but the bytes go global. Meaning you share digitally, but what you produce, what you consume, you recycle and reuse or reproduce is as much circular as you can do on a local level, right? So that could be an answer to your generic question about retail, because it could be that our world needs to be basically looking much more locally at the production level, but about ideas, concepts, designs, it can be still global, in order to basically prevent the collapse of our planet when it comes to ecological factors, right? So that is something that could be the future. So that would be a possibility how retail could look like, which is then much more localized. But I'm thinking very long term, right? And very macro, very global. It's still a question whether that is something where every city will adhere to that. And I'm quite sure that not every city will do this in the future, but many, and the more, the better.
So this brings us to this whole issue about, education can't just be for skilling up people. We need to have education at the leadership level, so that people who are involved in taking policy decisions or giving a certain direction, they need to be educated about what are the important factors that we need to consider. Do you see that we are on the way there of educating our leadership across companies, countries, government, etc., or do you see that as a big opportunity that we need to focus on?
Okay, I think that we have to differentiate. I think in general, what I see in the world is the effect of short-termism has become quite severe. That is in politics, that is in the business, that is predominantly in those two sectors. Yeah, because when it comes to politics, you want to be reelected. There's a political dynamics which basically leads the leaders, no matter how well they're educated they are, to short-termism and populism. Same goes with the business sector, because when you go public, then you are basically dominated by the market analysts and the public, the stock markets and the investors, how you basically lead your company. And so it is something that can be in the way of being a good leader. Education of leaders is always important. And I think it is paramount, and it's paramount for every leader to have a good understanding about technology. That doesn't mean that they need to be technologists or technocrats themselves, but you cannot run away from understanding technology anymore because it's so impactful on our lives. No matter what we are and where we are and what we do, the use of technology, and I don't mean only digital technology, is more and more basically infiltrating every aspect of our life. So in that regard, leaders need to be apt to that. And but again, my fear is always the advent of or the dominance of short-termism. Yeah. So the benefits of something, including technology, is always overly emphasized in terms of the short-term nature rather than the long-term nature or long-term benefit. Yeah. And so yeah, that is basically a major challenge ahead for every leader that I see. Yeah. But particularly in those two sectors, government and business.
Yeah. So we'll end with this last topic, Ilham, is benchmarking Indonesia to another part of the world, or maybe another country or a region. Do you see Indonesia being aligned with some of the other nations which have got similar challenges and similar problems, because that would help us to align how to go forward in terms of
I absolutely agree. I think Indonesia will have to align itself with other nations that are in a similar position. This is also true because there's a lot of open communication and collaboration through institutions such as the G20 or the United Nations or ASEAN, or all these international, multinational organizations are actually leading every country, including Indonesia, to basically cannot run away from that kind of common thinking, right? It takes sometimes a while in order to be there, because there are other issues that the leaders have to basically they have to basically find responses to, which are not necessarily internationally driven, but they can be very much domestic driven. But I mean, in today's world, there is no country in the world that basically can completely shut it out itself from the international sphere, right? I mean, whether it's in business or in things like security issues or climate or health systems, everything is linked, right? And more linked. And so sooner or later, I think every country will be thinking very similarly. But the question is always, how much can you align yourself with what's the general thinking in this world to what your domestic issues are? Because these are sometimes very different, right? And that is a country which is highly developed, has very different issues than a country that is very poor, which has different issues that than a country that's like in between. It's not really very poor, but it's also not fully developed. These are the so-called middle income countries. Like Indonesia is a typical case for that. And I think for a middle income country like Indonesia, the additional difficulty is that you have to actually basically craft your policies addressing a very big bandwidth of different issues. You have a lot of poor people in Indonesia. At the same time, you have very developed parts of Indonesia, and this is all the same country. And you have to have policies that address all of that. In very poor countries, they're just all poor. In very developed countries, yes, you have also some poor people, but the majority of people are already developed. So, but in a country which is like middle income, you have the bandwidth is so big, yeah, and so that makes policy making so difficult. And I think that is exactly actually the underlying challenge when it comes to having the ability to escape the middle income trap. And the recipes for that are sometimes not only to be found in your own countries, but you can have a look how other countries do it, right? So in that regard, there's always a good example of what to do and what to do. It's not a copy and paste thing. You cannot just copy it and it works in your own country, but you have to try it out. But at least you have an idea what other countries did. And so, yes, and that's how countries align with one another. They go through a joint learning process with some successes and some failures, but the iterative communication and trying to compare and understand it will, at some point in time, more and more align countries with one another, I think.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ilham, for being here today and sharing.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Pleasure.
I think there's an opportunity here to be wearing many hats in the whole field of how we bring AI to the people, and that's one of the things that we're trying to do.
Well, I talk much broader than AI here, right? This is much broader than AI, actually.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, Sachin.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Ilham and Mr. Sachin Gopalan, for the session.